Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today I get the opportunity to work on a Daiwa BG with the DigiGear feature. This one made in China, and this one is relatively sluggish. Now, the fellow brought it in, told me he had the reel apart, he greased it, and the performance deteriorated. Well, I worked on one of the other ones that he had in, and quite honestly, he so overloaded it with grease that there was nothing it could do but try to walk through quicksand. Well, we're going to take this apart to show you how to take it apart, service it, and keep it running, and we'll probably be cleaning up a load of grease in the interim. So if you want to see that, please stick around. I start by removing all the exterior pieces and parts. I'm going to start with the spool right now, and as I do that, I want to remind all of you that the best way to stay on top of my channel is to subscribe, and if you do subscribe, use the notification button to remind you of when I'm posting a video. There you go. Spool is off, the adjuster knob is off. There's a spool bearing. There's two shim washers under here that are for the spool height and a click ratchet. So I like to take my pieces and parts and put them into a parts tray. I use the bottom of a fast food container to do that, and with the exception of those bigger parts like the spool, all of the pieces and parts will go into the tray. Alright, we're going to remove this stack now, and as I do that, I want to encourage you to take pictures as you're doing the take apart and the servicing on this reel, because if you get stuck, the picture is the best reference point in terms of where things were at a given point. So use your cell phone camera or digital camera, or hey, use film if you want, and just use the camera at critical points before you go too far to notice where these pieces are and how to get them off. Well, we've got I might have luck here, let's see, I'm not sure. Okay, so this is a traditional threaded nut, and I used a deep socket because I had the axle shaft there. This one is also one that you could remove by coming in with a standard wrench or a box wrench. You could come over the top of it and take it off. Some of these have a cup that's way too deep, and if it's deep, then the only way to get to it is the socket. With that removed, you can remove the rotor, and those two big parts, while they're big enough that they're not going to walk away on me if I leave them outside of my parts tray. Next up, I'm going to take the shield off of the assembly. And this series of reels, for whatever reason, Daiwa went to these reels that you basically remove the pinion gear and the bearing to remove your axle shaft. Well, the piece is off here, and you can see a couple of things going on inside now. This is our anti-reverse clutch. This is the collar. There is an anti-reverse override switch that there's a little extension coming out of the clutch, and there's a tie down here that holds the two bearing assemblies in. You can take this clutch and the shield off first. You do not need to remove the screws for that, but you will need to remove the screws for the next step. Well, what I see here right away is he certainly was liberal with the grease, which is kind of what happened with the pen that he did. And this is one assembly that shouldn't be greased. You shouldn't be greasing your anti-reverse clutch. That's a friction-driven device, and you don't get friction if you got grease in there, or you don't get maximum friction. Alright, I wanted to do that because I wanted to make sure that there's no issues here with hidden screws or things as we go about taking this off. Well, we're going to remove the side plate now. That last part here, you could take let's put that in the box. You could take that pinion gear and bearing assembly out right now if you wanted to. There's no absolute certain way to do it. You do it how you're comfortable, but at the end of the day, they all have to come out. Alright, that one goes to the bump guard, and I believe this bump guard can come off now. It does. So when I put that into my parts tray, I want to nestle that screw right next to it so I know that that's the big one. I probably should have done this earlier. I'm going to put the rotor back on so I can get the handle off. And this is a reverse threaded handle. So we'll just wind that off. Now I can put my rotor back and we can continue. There's 3 screws on this one. They're Phillips head screws. Go ahead and take those off next. And while I'm doing this, if you have any questions on this reel or any reel, maybe you're working on one and you're a little stuck by what's going on. Maybe you reached a crossroads where you did what this fella did. He took it apart, greased it, put it back together again, and noticed that it wasn't working the way that it should. It's very difficult to turn. At that point, he just asked me if I could do it for him. But regardless, if you have one of those questions, leave that in the comments section. I'll be happy to try and answer that question for you, maybe get you back on track, and see if we can't save your reel and give it a second chance. There's 3 side plate screws. We're going to remove the side plate now. I just want to check what side is the right side. This is the right side here. So there's a bearing underneath. I'm going to oil that bearing. That's a shielded bearing, not a sealed bearing, so the oil will seep in. Put that in here, and then I'm going to take those 3 screws. I'm going to put those right into the belly of that case, just so I know which are the case screws there. And let's see if we can get this out now. We may be able to just pull that right out. No. Alright, so that's where we want to come up top here. As I mentioned, they kind of have this oddball way of putting this crosswind gear in. I have 2 very small screws here. I'm using a micro screwdriver for it. I think I could probably get away with the regular one. It seems like it has a pretty deep cut there. The regular one, in my definition, is a #1 Phillips head screwdriver. And I probably should do it there. Let's just see. Alright, so if you look down here, you're not going to find a screw on the end of this crosswind block. What you are going to find is a rod here that seats it in one channel. We'll show you that later. And one rod over here, which is a connecting point. That one should just lift out. Well, the only way I've had success of getting this axle shaft off is to pull the assembly now. Just like that, and you can see, before I go too far, I want to get that little screw out of there. This is your pinion and bearing assembly. There should be one more screw in here. I want to make certain that I have that. And then when you do that, now you have the play to walk this out. And remove the other pin. And now you should be able to lift it up and out through the bottom. There is a screw on here. You can see it in here, but I've never found an easy way to get this screw out to detach this crosswind block. So that's how I do it, and it's proven me okay. I'm going to wipe down all these pieces and parts, put that in my parts tray. I'm going to take the collar off here. I just put the 2 screws in the box and put that collar in there. I'm going to remove your bearing, and we're going to service the pinion gear as part of the overall process. Now, he tells me that he lubed it. I don't know if he ever cleaned it. I don't know if he even got in here to the extent that we got in here, but we're going to kind of find that out, right? And there's a lot of old grease on the top of the bearing. And there's a bearing shield here, so let's just go ahead and take care of this. I'm going to re-lube that. I'm going to use Penn Precision Reel Grease for this. As best I know, it's not sacrilegious to use Penn grease on a Daiwa reel. And we'll just load that up. This is a little water shield O-ring. Make sure that goes back in. And take that bearing, put that on, and and then there should be a shim washer that comes here. Alright, that should enable me now to remove the main gear. And I guess what he's telling me is he just lathered up the bottom of this case here, and he's claiming that's probably the issue. So we'll take care of that. Well, I'm going to stop after I remove this. I'm going to stop for a moment. I'm going to go get the schematic for the reel, because as much as I think that bearing shield belongs on the top of the bearing, there's just an outside chance it belongs on the bottom of it. And I want to make certain before I go any further that I've done it properly. So we'll shut it off now. We'll come back with the schematic. Okay, so I went to the trusty schematic, and sure enough, I would have made a mistake had I left this washer on the top. The washer belongs on the bottom. So always check. If you're not sure of it, this is an example where things would have fallen out. If you're not sure of it, by all means make certain that you go back, find a reference point, whether it's your pictures or the schematic or what have you. Alright, well, I took the time while the camera was off to clean up the body, get that old grease out of there. I'm a little bit concerned because the fellow said it was totally overloaded with grease, and that was his belief in the issue, but quite honestly, wasn't that much grease in there. Now, this modern grease that he was using is very tacky. It's almost like taffy, but I don't know. We're going to find out. All right, let's go try to do the reassembly then. So it's pretty easy. There's a shield that goes on first. It's almost a paper-thin piece of metal that goes right in there behind your crosswind block. This is your crosswind gear. Crosswind gear in the middle has a bearing, and I did go about oiling it. Next up then, we want to make sure that we get a good amount of grease onto the gear itself. And check the teeth, make sure that they're uniform and clean, that they're not chipped or broken. Look at it from this angle, also look at it from the top down. And we can go ahead and put that back on. Okay, once we've greased up the crosswind block and gear, want to put the bar on top of that in the slots in the case. We want to take our axle shaft and crosswind block, a little bit of grease on there. And we're going to insert that through and up, and we want to get this so that the crosswind arm sits on top of the stud on the block, and that little wedge side of it is on the post here. We can then take the main gear, and we went back to that schematic, found out that the washer belongs below the bearing, not on top of it. We're going to bring that piece into the assembly now. And then we should be able to put our main gear in behind there, just like that. Well, the only thing left then is this piece, which is going to go through the case, through the hole in the crosswind block. And there's a hole, you kind of have to check it out, but there's a little hole offset to get that stud there. Sometimes it's easier to see than others. And you just have to work it up so that it seats properly. And we're not quite there. Gravity is working against me here. And you'll know when it's in because the recess in the case, there you go. You'll be able to see that it's pushed all the way in here. Well, that's the bottom end of this assembly now. Got a crinkled up spacer washer here, but that's about what we're going to do with that. But below that then, the only issue here is the bearing on this side. That fell out. Now, the fella did tell me when he was working this that he took out the bearing clip, and well, it shot out and went away and is gone, and I don't have the replacement retention clip for that. And we're just going to work that in and over the gear the way it should. And unfortunately that clip is not to be had here. Okay, we've got everything re-lubed, reset, and if you wanted to at this point, if you hold your main gear, you can give it a ride, see what it does. Make sure that you have the full and complete turning of it, which we do. Well, next up then, we've got to assemble a top. We want to make sure that that main gear bearing is all the way down. This one's just going to be problematic, I think, at least for a moment. It's a shame we don't have that clip. I think we may want to order that clip. But one way I can do that for sure is to just put the handle on. That will hold it down. So why don't we do that? More than one way, right? All right. We can actually close this case up now because there's nothing more to be done down there. I got my 3 screws. I got 2 of them. One of them, there we go. Let's go ahead and put the cover on this side. And then let's grab the 3 screws to tighten this up. So this has been a fairly common approach. They've used this sliding crosswind arm attached to the axle shaft on several models now. I think it's actually even on the Sweep Fire and some of the lower end ones. I'm sure it's in their design, but nothing wrong with it. It's just it's got a little bit of a different approach to it. You just need to know that when you're servicing the reel. And you always got to watch that lousy little bar here, because that bar is held in by the bump guard, and if you're not paying attention, well, from time to time that thing slides out, and then you pretty much are opening up the case again trying to figure this all out. So let's go put the bump guard right back on then. There should be one more screw there that was holding the bump guard in. So let's get that on. All right, bottom's done. And then we just need to tighten up the top. Reinstall a couple of pieces and parts, and we'll see how we did. So the first thing we want to do in terms of getting up top is tie down this bearing. That bearing had the little collar on it, if you remember. So let's go ahead and line that up. There's 2 sides to that collar. One of them is tapered. Make sure that you get it that way. Line up at least one of those holes. Me and the small screws, we always have fun here. I'm going to just use a little dab of grease on there to see if I can't have the grease act as a little bit of a glue while I aim the screw for that starter position there. And we're in pretty good shape with that one. And then let's kind of line up the other one. Go to my parts tray, get the second piece there. A little bit more of that grease on here to see if we can hold. We moved it a little bit. I don't tighten down the first side. I like to leave the swing in there so we can get it done correctly. There we go. Now we can tighten them both down. Okay, once we do that, then we want to grab our cover that goes on top of that assembly. Locate that over the holes to close that up. That'll make it a little bit more watertight. We have our 2 screws that are inside the parts tray, so we'll go grab those. And again, I want to remind you, I know this video has been running on, but if you like this kind of video if you like the art of reel repair, the hobby of collecting reels, understand a little bit about the manufacturers, the histories of reels, and so on, then I would encourage you to subscribe to my channel. And again, if you do, use that notification button. I work on all kinds of reels. Today we're working on a BG Daiwa. Tomorrow it might be a low profile bait caster, and then we might be over on the saltwater side of the stuff. So whatever it is, I would encourage you to kind of subscribe, hit notifications, and then see if it's something you want to watch. Alright, here's your rotor that goes on top. After that, we can remember that this was a traditional counterclockwise removal, so it's a traditional clockwise installation. Go ahead and turn that. Go ahead and grab the, need to reset the ratchet. And I keep my ratchets and the like right near at hand, because if I do wind up in a situation where I need to grab a tool that I'm not expecting to use, I don't want to put the reel down for very long. I would prefer to have those things nearby. Very small screw, that's the tie down for the rotor nut. And we have our click ratchet that goes next. And we have a couple of the red ratchets, spools, that they're there for the line adjustment height. Let's take a look over here. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that this was not performing very well. We'll see how we did with that, but in the service you want to make sure that you deal with the drag washers as well. And to do that, we need to remove this spring clip. Once you get that started, walk it around and bring it out. Make sure you hold your hand on that. It does have a tendency to shoot. Alright, let's pull this out. Well, the fellow certainly over-greased everything below. Let's go and clean that cavity out then. These have got a Carbon-Tex type of a washer to it, very thin. You don't need to grease them. If there's grease on them, it's fine, but you don't need to. We have a traditional 6 set, so we have two of these round ones, which are called keyed. They have a rectangular center, so one goes top and one goes bottom on that. Here's your second washer. The middle washer is what's called the eared washer. It has 2 points on it. Let's go ahead and put that back together. That one fits in the slots inside the spool. One more Carbon-Tex. I'm going to clean that top washer off. Put that in there as well. And then we can grab that clip again. Start with one side. Again, hold it down. It can spring. These things tend to shoot from time to time. And then work it in with your finger. There's not very much tension on it, but that's the way it needs to work to complete that process. One more thing, there's a ball bearing that belongs under here. You saw me take it off when we removed the axle shaft. It actually belongs like this. I'm noticing I have the little metal washer. There's a secondary little shield for that bearing. You can see it there just off to the side. That goes on. There's 2 of those. One's top, one's bottom. Make sure you do that. Let's go ahead and put that back onto the reel. Put our adjuster on. And we'll give it a ride. We'll see how we did. Well, since we're servicing this reel, you want to put a little bit of oil onto both sides of the bail arm. You don't have to remove the bail during an assembly unless it's not working. Just open it up and close it a couple of times to work the oil in. And let's see how we did here. Well, look at that. We've got a full rotation of the handle now, where before we didn't have any rotation. So wherever that dried grease was the problem, it's not the problem any longer. This one turns nice and free and easy. So Brian is going to be in luck with this one, and I think we've all learned our lessons from this one. I hope you've enjoyed it. To our first responders and essential personnel, thank you for everything it is that you do. To everybody, please stay safe, stay well, and stay watching. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.